And I've got signatures from both of them.
Okay, you got releases?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And I'll have to get you one of those myself.
Yeah. The form is on the table there.
We're on 145 stations now.
Right. You know, we air only original content.
Yeah, but I mean, as a listener, you might be interested.
I got one.
Not that any of us have time to listen to much stuff, right?
Well, I tell you though, like I'm really keen on news, so I can learn how other people are making sound.
Excellent, exactly.
Now we gotta decide who goes first. Maybe you can arrange it. Yours will make it better.
You listen and go, oh my God, that was...
Every time you go, there's something it's really, like, everything's gonna be, it's also gonna be amazing. Yeah. That was great.
Okay, are we ready to get started? I am Tom Voorhees. I'm the presenter of this section. And we're missing one of our presenters at this point, Eric Teganoff. Hopefully he will show up at some point. And I want to introduce Yuko Kodama, excuse me, and Leigh Rovardis. Yuko is from KBCS in the name of the city?
Belleville.
Seattle Bellevue.
Seattle Bellevue, okay. And Leigh is KRFP in Moscow, Idaho, who I've had a relationship with for several years. We've upgraded his power on his station several times, so that he has a much better coverage area since they started as an LPFM in the bottom of a canyon, so to speak, and now he's up, 1,400 feet?
Yeah.
Something like that, and covers, probably from Moscow, Idaho, probably halfway to Spokane. And Yuko's station is in the Seattle area and covers the greater Seattle area and beyond, I presume. Is that correct?
Yeah, so King County out to the Bremerton, the islands, and actually down to Good Canal in Aberdeen. So good coverage south and then just over to the Cascade hills.
And I need to explain that I am not an experienced news person. I view news from a news consumer standpoint. What I do is I try to put news stations on the air throughout the country, some north of the border, some south to the border, some east as far as Puerto Rico so far. And that's kind of my gig. These two folks are the people that do news on a daily basis, and Leigh is the person that's actually started his station from scratch, does it on a minimal budget, something like, 35, 40K a year, something like that. And one of the previous news segments yesterday, they were talking about budgets in the area of 100K, something like that for a year. And Leigh knows how to do it for a lot less money. Leigh is also the station manager, which is the only paid employee that KRFP has. And I'm going to let Leigh lead it off and see where we can go from there.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to sort of present from the point of view of somebody who runs a station in a small town on a limited budget. We're a very progressive station. It's in our mission statement, and we basically try to give people good coverage. Our station's about 50% talk. Some of it's syndicated from Pacifica and so forth, and then we have music as well. And I think I want to start off just by saying that about the urgency of the political moment. This is probably not a time to just be playing music, and I suppose some of you here are at stations that are predominantly music, and you're thinking that, oh well, we've got to start a news department. And I want to give the caveat that this may not be the way all stations might look at starting a news department, but if you're on a limited budget and you have a lot of volunteers, this is sort of how I went about it. And we started the station, and within a few weeks we kicked off trying to do newscasts. And one of the things I would advise people, just to get their feet wet and things, is to start training people to go out and record events. Even if you don't have a formal newscast, get those public affairs on the air, record press conferences, panel discussions. If there's any protests, there's going to be a lot of protests now. With Trump and the Supreme Court and things like that, you're gonna be wanting to get those on the air. Start with that, and then decide on a time when your newscasts are going to be. What we did is we have a morning show, which is a mix of music, but the emphasis is on news. That's where we put all our news. It's an hour and a half, and then it repeats. I guess Morning Edition keeps rolling for, So it goes, people perform the show live 7 to 8:30, and then it repeats 8:30 to 10. And it includes some national news segments. We used to get Free Speech Radio News, and right now we do feature story news headlines, and we cut up the stories from the previous night's KPFA evening news so we have some national and international feature length things. Usually limit it to 8 minutes, although with Kavanaugh that we've been doing 13 and 15-minute segments, and generally me or somebody goes through that audio after KPFA evening news airs, and we cut out the words today, tomorrow, and yesterday for time segments, and so those go on Morning Mix, as well as all of our local stories, and I'll tell you what that includes in a minute. But we also have an evening newscast, which includes sort of a mashup of the KPFA national headlines at 10 a.m. and noon, and the latest, well actually all days, FSN feature story news, and that usually runs about 10 minutes. It's a half-hour segment for our KRFP evening report at 5:30, and then after the headline, the international and local, or international and national headlines run, then we read basically all the local stories that we've produced during that day. And the Morning Mix people, they come in at 5:30 and start writing. They write stories, more of aggregate type stories. In other words, they'll go through the papers, rewrite them in a way that can be a quick headline piece for people to know what's going on, so people get the idea that they're getting a comprehensive overview of all the news in the region, which is the Northwest. Generally Washington and Idaho are emphasized, and then Oregon and Montana, if they have environmental stories or human rights stories that might be of interest to the people who are listening. And as far as our local reporting goes, that we have this set up to record phone interviews, and we also send people out. And among all the DJs, we have about 35 DJs, and maybe probably more like 50 or 60 people on the active list of DJs. Some are substitutes and they aren't coming in every week. And if I see an event coming up, I'll try and get somebody to go and record it. I'll say, you know, citizen journalist opportunity. And I generally get good reaction from that. Somebody will usually say, oh, I'll do it. And we also have interns that are quick to jump on stories like that. And basically it's go out and say record the Proposition 2 forum on Medicaid expansion, or go record the candidates forum, or oh, there's an interesting panel discussion on, you know, choosing the Supreme Court or something like that. And we are in a university town. We have a lot of panel discussions, symposium, colloquiums, all sorts of interesting things that you can create local news stories out of that people are really interested in. You know, like I said, we're a half talk station, so people who are tuning in are going to be oriented towards public affairs a lot. So we get those things recorded. What I usually do, if it's not an intern that's like really working on news writing, I'll have them bring the audio in, and we'll open up the you know, hour or whatever audio they have in the sound editor, and they'll sit next to me as I find sound bites and get them ready, and we put them in the morning mix folder for the morning folks, and then write a script. And those are actually just left on the clipboard for the morning folks to read on the air. And those stories have a 24-hour life cycle. So if we write something for morning mix, it gets on the evening report as well. You know, and sometimes you might need to update it depending on the, you know, if it's something that keeps breaking, that's just an urgent story. And if it's, you know, airs on evening report first, then we'll repeat it on morning mix. And, you know, we write scripts, all caps, and then for the sound bites, we've got little brackets there and small letters, and people know that that's where they plug in the sound bite. And, you know, they play it through, actually Winamp on our station. We can talk about that. I'm sure there's better ways to do it, but Winamp's really what's worked for us for automation and live assist sort of automation. So let's see. So we do teach sound editing and script writing as well, you know, mainly for the interns or anybody who wants to be a citizen journalist and, you know, take some of the, take some of the responsibility for themselves. I do edit most of the scripts that are written. So the morning mix people, not so much. They've got to get a final edit for their you know, aggregated stories. They aren't usually doing original reporting, but they are playing the stories we wrote the night before. Let's see. And so, you know, one of the reasons we want to have people or listeners hear, you know, all the stories, or get the idea that they're getting a comprehensive overview of the news from the Northwest, is because we sort of want to be the go-to source for people, or at least certain people in the community that you know, we don't really want them necessarily to depend on the local newspaper. And one of the reasons are, I sort of want to give you a couple examples of ongoing stories in our community that are that we're really the only ones doing really comprehensive coverage of, and pointing out certain issues in certain ways. Well, one involves the rerouting of the Highway 95, which Idaho has a one north-south highway. It's 2 lanes a lot of the way. It's, you know, Idaho's not a very populated state, so and they want the Idaho Transportation Department wants to reroute it over Paradise Ridge, where there is actually some of the last remnants of loose prairie habitat, one of the most endangered habitats in North America. And they want to put it over the ridge in a place where, oh, there's a lot of you know, fog and ice in the winter, and also where there's you know, the legendary giant Palouse earthworm. It wasn't seen for like decades. And then one of our board members lives sort of near Paradise Ridge. He goes hiking up there every day. and he starts hiking in really wet weather and when it's pouring rain, and he starts finding these giant Palouse earthworms and brings them down to the university to get analyzed, and yeah, it's true, it's the legendary giant Palouse earthworm. Earthworms in North America are almost all European transplants. This is like North American, and so there's this issue of ecosystem in the web of life and habitat that isn't really getting covered. And meanwhile, the transportation department, they're so, for whatever political reasons, they've decided that they have to route this right through this habitat, or very close to the habitat where the disturbance would be. And they came out with like a preliminary environmental impact statement that was, they went shopping for quote-unquote experts that would say what they wanted to say, about the species, about the weather, and all that. And if you were just taking the paper, you wouldn't be getting that for the most part. I mean, it's not like they don't cover the story somewhat, but the whole idea that they could that the old route is still going to be open as a dangerous 2-lane highway, even when they put the 4-lane in, really never gets mentioned. The whole idea that the transportation department could have put speed limit signs up to save lives on this highway really doesn't get mentioned, So that's one thing. And then the other big story that we're pretty unique in covering is there's a cult taking over our community. This community of Moscow, Idaho, and it's a I think it's Calvinist, but it's basically we call it a cult. They're right-wing Christian. They now have a college there that has wherever it's existed in 3 places in our city, and every place it existed in violation of city zoning laws, because you can't have colleges in the residential neighborhoods, you can't have colleges here, and you can't have colleges in the central business district. And yet they have their people in all the institutions in town, city government, county government, the state university, the newspapers, that they got away with it without anybody noticing it for a while. And so and they're the type of group that the leader, Doug Wilson, has basically stated he has a 15-year, halfway through a 30-year plan to take over the downtown and make it like Oxford or something, and he's the type of guy who will, he'll teach his students about the ownership of wives, and that women have to submit to their husbands, and he posed for the local newspaper standing on the rainbow flag because they're anti-gay, and the worst thing he does is they don't have dorms, and so they put the students at their New St. Andrews College and their seminary school in houses where these sort of wealthy people have large houses, and so they're rooming there. And a couple of them in the last decade ended up being pedophiles. One of them was like a serial pedophile, kids as young as 2, and then another one was a guy that was 23, had a relationship with a 13-year-old, for a year there, and then he's writing letters to the judge asking for a measured sentence. Yeah, they're guilty, but he's repented, and during this whole process of finding out, like when they're accused, he's not even telling his congregation, let alone the whole community, that these people are, there. So it's sort of very scary, how he's, he and this wealthy church, building a whole new grade school right now, gets away with all these things, and part of it is because they're in all the institutions in town except Radio Free Moscow, which is our corporate name, KRFP. And so we report intensely on that. One of the person who was in the relationship at age 13 is actually in her adult life now is a advocate for childhood sexual abuse survivors, and she gives speeches around town, and this is stuff that is just not getting covered in any realistic way by the local media, and I guess I include the other radio stations in that too. So,
Steve, can I ask you a question?
yeah.
Have they taken over the local media?
Well, there's sort of this this thing that I think people are afraid to bring it up in news stories a lot. So, saying they have taken over the local media may not be absolutely correct, but there's so much money invested. There's like advertisers and things like that. So I think that there's like an unwritten message that you don't go too far in reporting on these guys. We're a non-commercial station, and we're not gonna shut up. So,
Okay.
yeah. So that's an example of plus the Trump moment. You're thinking of starting. You're starting a radio station, or you have a radio station that mainly plays music. Definitely find ways to get a community radio or get community radio news on the air, and if you have to, just start putting unedited local events on the air. People will probably appreciate that. Yeah, it's better to edit things down and make it more interesting, but it sort of depends on your community. I think in a lot of urban areas, people want their news really, really quick, and we do that too. In the morning show, but in some of the non-drive time hours, a DJ's not coming in today. Instead of just putting a music playlist on or finding a sub, we'll put the speech from the sexual assault survivor or some other important pertinent panel discussion or something on the air, so people can hear it all the way through. Another thing we do is we always invite the candidates in for the local offices for call-in forums, and that's after we've already interviewed them. So very comprehensive coverage of democracy in the local area, and and candidates for governor come by and all that. I mean, they don't come by the station, but we'll cover all that, the statewide stuff too. We'll cover the legislature extensively, and Moscow's it's got a progressive streak a mile wide, but it is Idaho, and the right wing dominates most of the state. So it's one of those the struggles. I live in Moscow. I'm not going to move. So I'm going to fight the good fight there, and that's really why we started the station in the first place. We have progressive in our mission statement, and I guess I could talk a little bit more about nuts and bolts, but I think I'll let some of the other panelists talk about their news departments and how they do it.
Yeah, we're gonna. Okay, we're going to go to Yuko next, but I just wanted to emphasize that Leigh has got his station organized so that the bigger part of the news gathering happens with volunteers, and he's willing to train people with no experience if they can find a place to live in town. I think, is that correct?
Yeah.
And then you can go back to your own station, and you've got some experience to start up your own. And with that, we'll go to Yuko.
All right. First, I want to do a quick check with the folks here. How many are with stations that have a news department already, or already produce news programs? And so then, is it that a lot of folks are kind of trying to figure out how to start one, or
with all volunteers, yes.
With all volunteers, yeah. All right. Okay, well, I guess, Leigh had already spoken to, the importance of why you have a news department. I mean, in times like this, and the consolidation of the media, where we have like 5 corporations that control most of what we consume, and then And then with the cost effectiveness that they're considering in terms of, putting out news, and everything is kind of being packaged in these ways where it's the same kind of story is going out in a lot of different places, and while local newsrooms are getting depleted of resources and journalists are losing their jobs. So that's one. We have, community radio has a service, a public service, and one of them is to provide the diversity of, opinions that are out there so we can have a more informed democracy, and to counterbalance what is going on in our media right now, including, the concentration of power in this 1% that is controlling then what goes out in our media as well. So I would say, that would be, the importance of news. Like in Washington, we lost Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and we had, two main newspapers, the Post-Intelligencer and the Times. Now it's just the Times. And then we've lost, lots and lots of small, more regional papers: King County Journal, Valley Daily News, Bellevue Journal, American, Issaquah Press, Sammamish Review. These all shut down. Como, King, and Cairo shifted from local. These are television stations. The bigger television stations shifted from local to corporate-controlled newsrooms and lost a lot of staff. Como, all the news staff were laid off at one point. And then Bellingham Herald, the Olympian drastic cuts. Seattle Weeklies is a kind of a weekly newspaper. It went from 24 people in there amongst their writers to 3 at one point. And then another weekly paper went to Bike Weekly. So this is just a snapshot of Washington State, let alone what is happening in the nation. So stuff to keep in mind as we consider our service, our public service to the community. So this is why I think it's critical that radio stations are offering local news programming that reflects the community. Then the other aspect is, know our roots. Public broadcasting, it is, the public interest to encourage the development of programming that involves creative risks that address the needs of unserved and undeserved audiences, particularly children and minorities. That's out of the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. This is what we stand for. And then UNESCO has a program for community radio worldwide. Community radio is a medium that gives voice to the voiceless, that serves as the mouthpiece of the marginalized, and is at the heart of communication and democratic processes within societies. With community radio, citizens have the means to make their views known on decisions that concern them. The notions of transparency and good governance take on new dimensions, and democracy is reinforced. So this is, besides the great music and things like that, I think this is why community radio exists. And I'd like to share just a quick kind of vignette about, in the Seattle area, we have a Chinatown International District, where McDonald's was wanting to have a presence in the community. And the community, there were some community members, the neighborhood planner was, and a group of people were fighting back. They were demonstrating, and then McDonald's had their representative meet with these community members and said, we can give you a community center, we might be able to give you a health clinic, what is it that you need? And they said, we appreciate that you have, are interested in doing this, but when it comes down to it, your concern is really about the bottom line. You have to please your investors, and therefore we will continue to fight the presence of McDonald's, that they would, let's see, where was this? That they would fight for their small businesses to be able to have a presence in the community, and that they would fight to have the reflection of the community continue instead of corporate businesses. So I guess this would be kind of the way we could see community radio. It's like the small-scale organic farmers that are selling produce at the farmers market. They're not to make tons of profit, but they are offering a service, and they're doing something that they believe in. And so this is, I would say, what community radio is, and that's why it's so critical to have this as part of, as your work. We are able to, kind of leverage the news programming at KBCS. We have the ability to, when we pitch for underwriting, we use our news programming quite often to say, this is what we are putting out there, this is what we stand for, and so for instance, like Equal Exchange is a worker-owned cooperative, and they have bought underwriting with KBCS. BECU, it's a credit union that tends to have these slogans that say, "You own it," so that's a place that we might go to, a credit union that will buy some underwriting. And then we have, we approach like-minded organizations. So for instance, the South Asian Film Festival, or South Asian group that puts on cultural events called Tasveer. Very progressive thinking community that we also align with and put together events with them. We also have started doing kind of an interesting thing that's been successful, which is putting together events. So it might not even be broadcast on the radio, or we can take that content and broadcast it, but we might have like a town meeting type of thing, or invite a speaker ourselves on art for social change or something like that, and have a cultural event. So that's the kind of thing that might help in underwriting, attracting underwriting. We also, not that we plan it this way, but we found that over time with the stories that we do, that people, the stories become the outreach, because in the most authentic way, because not that we plan it that way, but because we are bringing in people, having them tell their stories, often featuring organizations that have done a lot of work. And then when we post the stories on our website, and then put it out on Facebook with a tag of different organizations that might be interested in this topic, then our presence gets out more. They understand what the station stands for and what kinds of stories that KBCS puts out. And it becomes kind of this organic outreach thing that just by default. So I'd say that's been really interesting to watch how that develops, and it is development through trust, right? So some of the stories that we might feature might be like how certain organizations are getting out to some of the communities that are less known to get out to vote, for instance, and translating things into 80 languages or whatever, just so that people will know who, how to vote, who is representing what. We have a series of pieces where we go out and interview people while they're on their commutes. So we have a lot of gritty sound of people, in buses talking about how they grew up, or you know, lots of kind of outside sound things where we are going out and meeting people where they are with a simple recording kit. We've made it out to the prisons, the women's penitentiary. We were able to get in and talk with them about, you know, whatever they have to deal with within the prison system. 80% of women in prison are mothers. There are a lot of stories out from this trip around that. Things like celebrating the kinds of things that the community is doing. For instance, the mosque in Redmond, they have a once-a-month free clinic. So to get the word out about that and how they have a shuttle that goes to a tent city and picks people up, shuttles them back to the clinic, and then sends them back to their tent. And then Native American or indigenous groups that are working on tiny houses for the homeless community, things that people are doing all the time to better their community. And then, you know, things, I would say that this has been really interesting to watch too. About 5 years ago, we did a series on domestic violence survivors. Also around that time, child abuse kind of stories were coming out, and we covered it in a way where the people who were the thrivers, is what they call themselves, could speak from their heart of their experiences, rather than experts talking about, you know, what the policies are around it. And since then, people come to us. There's a lot of people who come to us with stories about their addiction, their experience with domestic violence, you know, and, oh, in my case, I'm really rich. I had a house, but I went homeless because I chose to, because my husband was doing this. Or, so I feel like stories start really coming to you because then they know how you approach it. And the point that we take, the perspective that we take is, how do we honor their story and empower the people to tell their stories in respectful ways, and then hopefully empower the listeners who can then, you know, use that in terms of, oh, you know, my sister, I've been noticing that, you know, I don't feel like she's in a very good relationship or something like that, and then think about ways to help them and to have more of a conversation around these things that thrive in silence. When they're not being discussed, they thrive, and the more we can put that kind of thing out there, the more that can be metabolized, is the idea, and to help heal the whole community. So that is an approach that we consider as we work on our stories. And because we're not a place that has a ton of resources, these first-person narratives are quite often the place where, you know, we can do our best work, because we cannot do investigative reporting, you know, in a way that these large NPR kind of places can do it. And we take pride in what we can do. So that's one thing that I'd like to talk about too, is I feel like a lot of it can be intimidating to, you know, take on news, and, you know, it's like, oh, you know, it's not going to sound right, it's not going to sound like, you know, what we hear normally. And, you know, I think that what that does is it's very disempowering. You defeat yourself before you even try. And so I think, and who says that what is out there right now that's professional is the right thing to be doing anyway? So, you know, there's a program that we air from Oakland called Hard Knock Radio. It's Anita Johnson and Davey D, two hip-hop artists that are out on the street getting this really gritty sound off the street with the buses and cars driving by, and they're interviewing these people about, you know, what changes they're seeing on their street, or, you know, oh, this place burned down and there were some fatalities, you know, what was going on here. They are, you know, you don't really need to sound like what often is being put out there as what you're supposed to be putting out there. No, you can do what you need to do to get your stories out in an authentic way. What matters the most is where your heart is when you're producing it. The main thing that I think, the biggest thing that you need to figure out is, you know, identify the station's ethical framework that drives everything. So, for instance, in the news department, in our news department, we look at, whenever we think about a story, we think, okay, are these voices that are not often heard in the mainstream media? You know, check, okay? Next, our mission, we already have in our mission social justice, which helps in terms of a news department, right? Because, you know, otherwise there's that whole navigation of, you know, there can be that navigation of the, you know, how many minutes of what did we have on which perspective. But we have social justice as a mission. So, you know, there, okay, check. You know, how does this storyline fit in? And then ask yourself the questions, what are you doing? You know, what are you trying to do here with this story, or with whatever you're trying to do for that day? Who are you doing this for, and what do you want the listeners to do once they hear this? These are the three things that, you know, we go through. And then there's other kinds of things, you know, like, you know, at our station we have other guidelines. We don't use the N-word, you know, no matter what context it's in, we don't, at our station we just don't. You know, things like, oh, once you say their name, do you use their last name, you know, to address them, or, you know, those kinds of things, those guidelines that you just kind of set up, right? Always check the pronunciation of names, fact check, you know, these kinds of guidelines that you set up for yourself, and then you and everyone else there can abide by them, right? And that helps when, as a news producer and people are flowing in saying they want to do stuff, it's a way to be like, okay, you know, these are our guidelines, and therefore, you know, this is working or this is not working. So that's also very intimidating, I think, for a lot of stations where volunteers and community members walking in are the source of the content, right? And then, let's see, and then at our station we have a lot of, let's see, how do we want to, and we have sources, you know, reliable sources that we use. So which are the reliable sources? We kind of have them mapped out for ourselves. So for us, and this may help you if you're looking for free content, Deutsche Welle Radio out of Germany. They have content that has been fact-checked and so forth. United Nations News, Public News Service, Feature Story News, Making Contact. We love them, and we also can split their shows up into smaller bits if we need to. With Good Reason, American Homefront Project. Then we have things like, you know, Your Daily Constitutional, Climate Connections, Pulse of the Planet, Jim Hightower. Oh, sorry. And if we
There's just so much going on.
Yeah, maybe we should send around an email, you know, list so that we can share this
You
information
can also
too.
post on the Grassroots Radio Conference website. Talk to
Okay.
Betty about that.
Okay, Betty?
Yeah.
All right. So I'll go over the
Because a
last.
lot of groups are doing that, a lot of presenters are posting on that.
Okay. Yeah, so American Homefront Project, I'll just go over the last few. Your Daily Constitutional, looking at legal matters throughout the nation of challenges of the Constitution.
Is that something you're getting off audio port, or where are you getting that?
They are, a lot of them are off of audio port. United Nations News, I went directly to them. Deutsche Welle, I go directly to them. public news service, there's a specific place I go to for that. Yeah, your daily constitutional climate connections, pulse of the planet, Jim Hightower commentary. So those are some that are free. And I will talk to Betty about putting this out. So these also help in kind of filling in spaces so that it's not all you all the time trying to figure out a daily show if you choose to go there, right? And then once you kind of have that, you've gotten yourself ready in terms of the station, then take your time with identifying people. Keep an eye out for the journalists that are retired, that are students, that are, keep in mind, I need an audio editor with a good ear for news, Just kind of watch your community, and this is where the community radio stations, this is your bailiwick, right? You know your community, so watch for that. And then think about possible partnerships with other news organizations. Like, for instance, KBCS has had a partnership with Yes Magazine, where Yes Magazine did interviews, and then they would send in their interviews to us, and we would edit them and put them out. So because they have the best knowledge of their own content. I've noticed that, there was another one that Workers Independent used to do with Grit Radio or something like that. They used to interview someone from one of their journalists, and then they would edit it and put it out. So these are opportunities that may be within your communities if you have great other outlets.
I recently I haven't listened to it, but I saw it on Audio Port. I think it's produced in Oregon, something called Wider View, and it's like someone aggregating international news into a half-hour program, and it looks intriguing to me, and I haven't followed up on it. But
Headlines?
it is on Audio Port.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, interesting. What was it? Wider View?
I think it's Wider View. I could.
And as I say this, if you are or will be starting up your own, news content, I would like to know about it because I feel like there's a real opportunity here for community radio stations to share content with each other and know what's going on in your region, or you see all these things that are echoing each other throughout the country, and this is an opportunity. So I would love to hear about.
Yeah, it's Wider View Radio, and it's on Audio Port. A roundup of international news with particular emphasis on the situation in Yemen. I don't know if that's
for that day.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And it's produced out of this community radio station in Eugene.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Okay. Let's see, what else to think about? Think about the resources you have. Among our staff, who are the people that kind of already think this way, news way, because it's a different sensibility, right? People who like to write, and with our radio station, I'll reach out to journalists throughout the region, whether they're print or video or radio, it doesn't matter. And there's quite a nice community of journalists in Seattle, at least, where we kind of mill around each other. And if there are print media folks that are interested in trying out radio, my door is open to anyone actually who wants to come in and try this out, because the only way you can change the media landscape is when you make it more accessible for people to enter, and more world experiences. More journalists have a diverse, set of world experiences. So, and then think about the stories that the established media in your area are covering and how you might do it differently. So, for instance, while people are talking about the opioid, the crisis and the policies and all that stuff, and getting these experts to come in and talk. Well, we followed a person on their 3-hour commute to the methadone clinic, a methadone patient. and they're just talking about how this happened to them and how they are navigating this and how they make this trip take 6 hours a day to get to the methadone clinic each day, and we just follow them, you know. So this is, these are the kind of angles that you have the power of, you know, getting that they quite often don't, because they don't go out in the community and get this. It's like Amy Goodman in Democracy Now! She's saying, you know, just go out on the street and talk to people. You know, don't just sit in some booth and be reading the paper and thinking that as news. That is not news, and you have the power to get real news out there. Another one would be like Topless Day, for instance. You know, people might scoff at that day, but we thought, okay, well, you know, another station, if they even cover it at all, might be, you know, nude beaches and so forth. And we decided to go with interviewing Femin USA about gender equality and toplessness, or, you know, how they use toplessness as a strength, a power, you know, a superpower in this case. So, you know, you can find angles that will be different because you are who you are, and don't discount that power.
Could I just ask you again, was that United Nations News you said earlier? Or?
Yes, United Nations News, and that's where you would need to reach out to them, sign a contract with them, and so forth. You know, but it is free.
Right.
So another thing to put out is, well, I mean, I had a PowerPoint thingy going on, but I wonder if I should just, here, I'll just show you this one picture. I don't know if everyone can see it, but this is, whoops. This on this side is NPR professional journalists, right? This side is our news department. Just know that, you know, I just want you to come out of here knowing that you can be different and it's okay, and it is authentic stories that can be fact-checked. They are real stories. It's not advocacy journalism. I was at a news meeting about diversity in the newsroom recently, and I wasn't planning on telling this part, but there was a person, they were talking about diversity in the news department, whether it's important or not. and then there was someone, it was a journalist of color who actually asked this question. They said, you know, if you're a person of color, a journalist of color, and you're going out and doing stories on your community, then isn't that advocacy journalism? And I thought to myself, when has that ever been placed on white journalists speaking with white people, right? You know, it is important for us to cover anyone, and maybe we can, you know, kind of have a different perspective than the professionals that, you know, had to get their PhDs to, you know, do their, to speak.
I heard Amy Goodman, in response to being accused of being an advocacy journalist, she said, well, I've got a good model because the corporate media advocates for the status quo.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah, and then, okay, so then things to do to get things going. So, you know, because news takes time and energy and things like that, you can do very simple things like traffic, weather, PSAs, you know, that's already just kind of heading in that direction, right? There was a thing that we did, which is called On This Day in History, which is going online and finding, you know, oh, on this day, you know, the slave ship came in from wherever, and that was the last one ever to bring people in or whatever. It's just looking at, being able to look at history from a different perspective. So it doesn't have to be all the kind of history that we usually hear about. And, yeah, so kind of questioning that, you know, people saying that they discovered a place when there were already people living there, and, you know, and being able to put kind of stories to that by giving, on this day in history, this is the day that the first justice of color was, you know, instated, or, you know, whatever it is. So those are simple and they don't take a lot of time. It's a way to start. Another thing is headlines. So you can take stories from, you know, other sources, reliable sources, and then, you know, such and such happened according to blah blah, you know, this, then this, and that's why you don't have to take the responsibility for having fact checked that, but you know it's a reliable source. The people that are listening know it's a reliable source. Live interviews, of course, is the next easy thing, right? And for live interviews, if you can have really good questions, have kind of something mapped out, that's great. Vox Pops, if you do have access to kits and get out on the street, just ask the same question to a bunch of people. That's called a Vox Pop, and then you put those pieces together and put those out. So it's like, this is kind of how people are feeling out on the street here at this time, at this place, and you try to get their first and last name as much as possible, unless it's a really sensitive topic, and that way, here, you've got good journalism, you've got, you know, perspectives from the street. Pre-recorded interviews, that would be the next, and then you can, these events that Leigh was talking about, pre-recorded interviews, if you can find someone who has a good editorial ear, or if you do, you know, you can edit out the parts that really pop, make it really powerful, and then the feature, which is the most, you know, complicated one, which is, you know, where you write script around actualities, people saying things, but it doesn't have to be as complicated as, you know, we think it needs to be in order to get good things out.
Yuko, we're gonna need to leave a little time for
Okay.
Eric here.
Yeah.
And I just have one question. What is your budget run per year?
For the for our news department, we've been able to. I started advocating, well, for some money, and we do have some money coming in for our series that is in regards to transit. That's about, we were able to get 40,000 for a year on that.
That's a grant?
That was underwriting, yeah, kind of grant kind of thing.
Yeah.
We also got Local Lore, which is a Association of Independents in Radio kind of grant that we got, where we had a great producer come in and work with our station. Local Lore.
How do you spell it?
Local and then O-R-E, like stories. So that was great. And then we used to have a work-study student do headlines for us every day. And because that's been so successful, now the station is putting money toward their part-time work to work up the headlines each day. And that's where they, you know, record, you know, themselves reading a bunch of news stories that they've summarized, and then using things from Public News Service and another network that we've partnered with. So that's something that we've decided to put money toward. Otherwise, we have a lot of volunteers who just take kits out and, you know, happen across things, and then they bring in the tape and we work with them to edit it if they're interested in learning how.
So what is your normal budget for a year?
So let's see, if it's outside of that, those kind of grant kind of things, I'd say we pay 3 people part-time, $20 an hour, up to 15 hours a week. So
Okay, so
I
how
don't know
much,
what that
what
comes
does
out
that
to.
work out?
What is it, you know, 20 hours a week, or 15 hours a week at 20, I don't know,
300
300, is it, 400 a week?
Times 3 is $900 a week.
Yeah, 900 a week, wow. Yeah.
You're fabulous.
So that's after many years. That's like after 10 years of working this and making a case that that we can do quality radio. So, you know, I don't want to make you feel like you can't do it. But it started off with all volunteers doing headlines, doing, you know, traffic pieces, doing feature stories, and one full-time person, me.
I have one quick question. Where does the local news fit into your daily schedule on the station?
The local news, we have a 1-hour daily show. And it is a combination of different pieces that we source from other media, like these.
4 o'clock, 5 o'clock?
7 to 8 a.m.
Oh, okay.
Yep, 7 to 8 a.m. Our news hours are from 5 a.m. until noon.
Yeah.
It features Hard Knock Radio, Democracy Now!, which airs twice, our personal show, and Tom Hartman for 3 hours.
And the rest is music.
Can you get Tom Hartman off the audio port?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's something on the audio part that that they posted that says you need to sign an agreement with us, but Ursula says that's all bogus because it's implicit. If they are posting stuff on audio port, it's accessible to anyone for whatever reason. Yeah.
Can I get one of you to shut the door so
Or
that
invite this person in.
the recording will be a little cleaner?
So, as a listener to KBCS, your news department is just fantastic. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight for other low-budget newsrooms is that you make something, it takes a lot of time. And something that UCO has perfected, I think, is evergreen stories and recycling over and over again, but not in the same way, but like shuffling it around and doing theme stuff, like a theme week. And so I wonder if you could talk about evergreen as how you approach that as a way to kind of not always have to do like today, like you were talking about editing out, you know, the headlines for the day. You do a lot of these kind of stories that are evergreen.
Yeah, so we produce a lot of evergreen stories. Well, what I was talking about earlier was the first person narrative. So the person who has, who's a survivor of whatever sort, those are evergreen stories. You know, those feelings that you get when you deal with that kind of stuff, and those are, you know, classic, right? They are gonna always be important. And with Me Too coming up, you know, there's that opportunity to get it out again. There's then when Kavanaugh something, Bill Cosby something, you know, these stories are able to be used over and over. Thank you for bringing that up. And so there's a lot that you can produce that, yes, can be used. I think there were pieces that we've done 10 years ago that we still pull up that, you know, we say, all we need to say is that this first broadcast 10 years ago, and it's very obvious that things are still the same. Yeah, I recommend that highly. And then also, we do this thing that helps, I think, us in terms of, you know, with the little amount of resources, taking something like Making Contact and cutting it up into 5 different pieces. So we have a piece that airs, you know, 5-minute segment of that longer piece that airs each day of the week, and that way you're able to get more mileage out of something, and then people are able to hear it kind of more frequently during that week. Yeah. So
we really need to get to Eric here before we run out of time. And I need to apologize because we were going to try to have a handout together with news sources on it, and we've all been tied up with other things and we never did get that together. But I have one that I use quite a bit, although I'm not a news person, which is called levelnews.org. Which you can find on the net, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric with Pacific.
Tom, did you say rebel or level?
Pardon? Level.
Level. L-E-V-E-L.
Levelnews.org. Eric's with Pacific News Service, which is primarily, if I remember right, a environmental news service, but I'll let you take
Sure,
it
yeah.
from there.
Apologize for being late first off, but it's Public News Service is the name of our news service. We have state services across the country.
Can you speak up, please?
Sure.
It's hard to hear you.
We have state services. Public News Service has state services across the country. Right now, I think we're in 37 states altogether. I cover Northwest states here: Oregon, Washington, Idaho. I am a reporter for Public News Service. And I guess before I get into Public News Service, I do want to say I am a KBOO. Still hard. I'm an alumni of KBOO. I started out at KBOO as a volunteer. I didn't have any actually real journalism experience before I got to KBOO, and they really showed me the ropes. Janka, who's here today, is fantastic. Did a fantastic job of making me into a reporter, I think. So I have to give a lot of thanks to KBOO. They were fantastic for me. But I became a reporter for Public News Service. We do short sort of radio bites typically. We have daily headlines that we do that sort of do a roundup of different stories from across the country, from all our different reporters across the country, and typically make them into like 6-minute long sort of roundup of headlines that are happening. Typically our environmental stories, because we get a lot of funding from places like National Wildlife Federation, Vendors of Wildlife, Earth Justice. We also focus on children's issues. And Casey Foundation helps us with some funding. We are used, I think, and hopefully our goal really is to help smaller stations, community stations, get some headlines from around the state, and typically they are stories that can work anywhere in Oregon or Washington or things like that. And the hope is that they're somewhat evergreen too, something that you can use throughout the week or something like that. I think that's really helpful, and I also, you wrapped up really like what our goal is. For the most part, social justice and, putting a voice towards the communities, and we work with unions as well, something that you don't hear a lot on commercial radio stations. That's kind of our goal too. And I do want to say, if you have any questions about Public News Service, please feel free to ask me. I can answer as much as I have the knowledge of. Are there reporters here? Are you here in town?
No, I'm like based in Sarasota, but I'm a reporter for like my news thing.
Okay.
For my station.
I think the volunteer model for creating reporters is one that is really effective, especially if you don't feel like you want to work at a local commercial station. I mean, I feel like I got a perspective on news from KBOO here in town that's been invaluable for me as a reporter. I did want to go over, and I'm just going to keep it brief because I think that both of you have this knowledge about creating local newsrooms that's really powerful and effective, and I think maybe I should cede some of my time to questions about to you guys. But I did want to say that to amplify some of our stories, we partner with organizations. You were speaking a little bit about this at KBCS, like the Media Consortium, New Energy Coalition. Those are two that I think are.
What was the first one you said?
The Media Consortium and the New Energy Coalition, I think, are two.
New Economy, isn't it?
Yes, New Economy Coalition, that are really effective at giving you resources for stories, making sure that your reporters can have at least a little bit of funding for things. There's also the Solutions Journalism Network that can offer funding if you are focused on stories that are, perhaps about a set of communities who are constantly in peril, some sort of actual positive sort of story, which I think we try to do as well. Communities that are doing things effectively that can be models for the rest of the country, things like that. And I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why people listen to community radio and grassroots radio and things like that, is that they feel like they can hear, rather than sort of doom and gloom that we constantly hear from a lot of CNN and bigger stations. They get to see a community that's actually doing something positive, something that is effective, and I think that's a helpful message to spread, and one that we try to do at Public News Service too, is rather than focus constantly on the sort of horrors we see coming out of Washington, D.C., get something positive out there. I also think we try to focus on community voices, people in the community who can offer a perspective on the news that you don't hear from a lot of those commercial stations too. Not to rag on the commercial stations too much, but we feel like we have we're trying our best to sort of counteract that a little bit. I did want to ask you about what you thought a volunteer, what makes an effective volunteer reporter, in your newsroom. What do you think is something that a successful reporter in a volunteer newsroom does?
I would say someone who's flexible in the way they think about their story. Who can also kind of be flexible with the interview or where the story goes, because the story often does not go where you expect it to go, which is actually the beauty of a story. Yes. And so to be open, someone who is really open to their story being changed around, to not going out. I mean, maybe 50 to 60% of the stories I work on actually make it out on the air. I will often follow a lead by phone. It's not like I'm spending, sometimes I'll spend hours and hours and hours on a story and it doesn't go out. But quite often, I'll call some people and then I'll think, okay, that wasn't the right way to go. I'm going to try this one, or okay, next one. Someone who doesn't have to get really attached to the story, if possible, and someone who can be nimble with it, and also just be really diligent about fact checking. I got this interesting phone call just recently about a story that went out about repatriation. It was where actually this was a Bracero program where we're bringing in all these people from Mexico for 22 years, getting them visas so that, especially it was during World War II when there weren't enough people here, and so they were bringing them in from Mexico. It was just 9 years before that they sent 1 million people, U.S. citizens or not, across the border to Mexico. But so the Bracero program, and this person was talking about, DDT being sprayed on the people that were coming here to, clean them up or whatever, right? So then they refer to, I asked how they found out about it. They said, oh, transistor radios were out in the farms, they could, that's how they heard about it, or at train stations. So then I get this phone call, and usually you're thinking, fact-checking the DDT being sprayed and, checking their genitals and that kind of thing. But this person said, it's 1942 that this happened, transistor radios weren't out yet, and,
that's right.
Though they came out later. So, the level of fact-checking is, it turns out, because it was a 22-year program, there were people who found out about it on their transistors, because transistor radios came out in 57. But, so it was fine, but, you know, the level at which people do start listening to your pieces is pretty interesting, so, anyway.
I think
yeah.
community radio listeners are very vigilant, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy listening.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and be prepared for, you know, those kind of questions, and to be open to that, and just make it a dialogue, and, you know, if someone's upset with what they hear, then, you know.
I think it's good news that
respect
someone
that
takes
too.
that level of ownership in their community radio.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and I have a 3-second response to your question. One thing that makes a good volunteer is interns. Go to the universities where they've got journalism departments and so forth, and then also somebody who's just flexible with their time or you know, has the drive to, you know, to get stuff on the air. And there are people out there, members of the community, that really care. So, yeah.
And I have another one like that. Lowell Bergman, who used to be a producer for 60 Minutes way back there before he got on the wrong side of 60 Minutes. At UC at Berkeley, he teaches an investigative reporting class down there, which turns out several people a year. And you can find him on the UC website. It's Lowell Bergman, and he would probably appreciate opportunities for his students to go through an internship at your station. So that's another place that you can draw on people if your own community doesn't have people that are really interested in pulling news together.
Excuse me, Tom, you know, I'd like to amend I actually know that program you're talking about, and a lot of the problems with the professional journalism schools is they turn out students who want to work for big-time news outlets. And they're not necessarily going to want to work at grassroots radio stations unless they have a social justice commitment. And that's particularly true at Berkeley.
Yes, and that's very true. But also, I mean, people that are graduate from such things also have a very hard time finding paying employment in news organizations these days as they continue to cut their staffs down like that. So that's a possible place you may be able to draw on. Yes.
So, to the question about using volunteers and the percent of the work that you do that actually gets broadcast, I go to a lot of events and I record lots of stuff, and a lot of what I do does not get broadcast on KKFI, for example, but I give it to the organization that I'm recording, and some of it gets used and some of it doesn't. But the key thing that I can tell myself is, if I do not record it, I cannot use it.
Right. It's a question here.
Go ahead. Yes.
So how much of your news coverage is covering local news versus national news?
Well, I would say, you know, the stuff we work on, the national news to us is almost separate. I mean, yeah, we do integrate it into our morning mix show, and then there's a segment, but you know, what we're really working on, we'll take the national stuff as it's published. You know, Making Contact, we played just a half-hour show. You know, it's got a time slot on our schedule. So what we focus on is local and regional, the Northwest, and you know, the Moscow, Pullman area, the universities, and you know, a little bit further afield sometimes, you know, and so yeah, what I'm focusing on as far as what we produce and write and, you know, put into place on the air is going to be local. And, you know, occasionally be a local version of a national story, you know. Yeah, you know, the WSU student, the right-wing guy, they'll put up the wall that's really inappropriate sort of thing before Trump got elected, you know, that just to show their support for keeping Mexicans out, you know, and then the counter protests. Yeah, that's a national story, but we've got the local version of it right here. Those dynamics are happening locally, and so I think that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Most national stories are localizable.
Yeah.
So I'm going back to the volunteer question, because we're an organization that has no paid staff, and I kind of oversee the public affairs, and I'm a massage therapist, I'm not a trained journalist, right? So my concern is getting people who are kind of like crazy, overzealous, and their stories are just like too extreme in terms of their opinion. It's all about them, they're wanting to do the talking, as opposed to getting the story from a more neutral perspective. What's been your experience about that, and how do you guard against that?
Tell them to get both sides of the story, you know, go talk to the person you don't like. Find out what they have to say too. You know, I mean, because it's important on a station that's progressive to hear, you know, what the arguments are from the right wing and the racists and stuff, so you can develop counter arguments, you know.
Yeah, I'm just about the personality of the person that might just not be the right person you want out there representing your station. Have you run into that?
It's possible. I haven't.
That's why there's editors.
Yeah.
You also have to tell them the story's not about them.
Yeah.
It's not about them or their points of view. They're not doing their job if they're injecting
Assign them
something
stories
story.
that they aren't quite personally, I think you mentioned that they aren't necessarily attached to. Assign them the other story.
Right, if they're already involved in it, then it's a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So then, if there's a clear conflict of interest, you take them off the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like training and screening is really the answer.
We do have a workshop coming up on philosophies of editing that may or may not get into some of this, so,
Okay.
in fact, some of us might need to leave. I mean, just,
Yeah, how do you deal with your political file if when it's political season and you've got a variety of voices? How actively do you pursue making sure that both sides are getting time? Is that an issue?
When somebody's a candidate, I instruct people, we have sort of a free-form station, and people play music, but they also will sometimes just impromptu do their own public affairs. I tell them during election season, you cannot put a candidate on the air unless, as part of your show, unless you offer time to the other people. The way it legally works is, for a non-commercial station anyway, is that the other candidate can contact the station and say, I want equal time. The way I do it, the way our station policy is that we actually contact them and say, and offer them equal time, and it has to be in the same part of the campaign season. So you can't just wait till the end of the campaign season, because that'll give a big advantage to the person over the person you interviewed in May or June. So basically, and then I'll basically tell them, we're gonna do our own thing, because I'm gonna call up every candidate, do interviews with them, and then I'm gonna call up those candidates again, or, arrange for them to come in for call-in candidates for them. We put them side by side, if they're running the same race, put headphones on them, people call up and ask them questions. And
And you do that at every level of politics?
No, we do it at the legislature, county commission level. We have 2 legislative districts, one in Washington and Whitman County, and one in Idaho, which is Latah and Benoit County. And we do them, and then the city is in the odd numbered years, and we'll get all the city council candidates the same way, and the mayor candidates.
And then what if you have like a third party or someone, like a write-in, if they contact you, do they also get time?
Not only that, we'll probably reach out to them. It sort of depends on the year. But yeah, we'll have 3 people if there's 3 candidates in the studio. Yeah.
And at our station too, we have KBOO and KNKX, which are really big public radio stations. So when we decide on which races we're going to cover, we try to get each of the candidates and give them the same time, so there's not any opportunity for people to be saying, why this, or, and then if it's only, if we can't get all of the candidates, which we can't, we come up with this is why we're going after this race and this race and this race, and why we're going after this initiative and this one, so that if anyone is to ask us, because elections can get really, sensitive, then we have our you know, we have our understanding of where we're coming from for everything we're doing.
So your signal covers about 10 legislative districts probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we can take maybe 2 or 3 more questions and then
Someone
we're
hasn't
extending
talked.
into the next segment's time.
Someone hasn't told me.
If we have a couple of quick questions really quick and then we need to vacate.
I just wanted to actually point out a point of caution when it comes to using volunteers. And when I was at KPFA, the whole news department was white, and most of the paid staff is white, and all of their interns and all of the volunteers were white. And so often I would have these conversations where this young, very well-meaning young person would be like, I learned about racism yesterday in school. And it made me want to, like, kill people.
There's gotta be a policy.
And it affects the kinds of stories and how they're interacting with communities, right? Like, you can't send people like that into communities and have them ask important questions. They don't know what they're talking about. Meanwhile, when I asked students of color who had come and interviewed from like local universities why they decided not to take the news internship or volunteer, they felt very uncomfortable being at a station where 90% of the paid staff was white and all the people of color were volunteers. So these are things to think about. Like, you can't just use volunteers. You can't, and yeah, volunteers, like especially with students, like they don't actually have a lot of interaction with the community and they're not from the local communities. So I think it's just important to be very careful about how you think about race dynamics in the newsroom because they can get really messy.
Yeah, and that goes for stories that can come in to, you know, into our station, you know, too. There's ones that are just kind of a little awkward, you know, like that kind of, you know, oh, I met this drag queen, I want to do this story on this, you know, drag queen, or, you know, and then it becomes kind of like this funky object, you know, very exoticized kind of thing. And that's where the editor really can just have a conversation. That's the power of the editor. But then, of course, you know, you have to have people who get it from inside the station.
Yep, we're just wrapping up right now.
Yeah, anybody wants to chat afterwards, I'm gonna hang up.
Thank you.